I sit in on 12 to 15 interviews a week, and here's the moment I see most often. The interview ends, and then the manager turns to me, clearly pleased about the result. And then I ask them one question. What evidence did you collect? Now, the answer more often than not is, well, silence. Now, sure, the candidate was articulate, confident, even likable. It felt like a great interview. Confident, therefore competent. That's our mental shortcut. It is, however, a fallacy, and it's the most common way good managers make bad hires. Now, part of the problem is the questions. Tell me about yourself. What's your greatest weakness? What are your strengths? Candidates, though, have rehearsed answers to all of them. So you get a polished performance and you learn exactly nothing real. So in this video, I want to break down the 7 questions that force evidence out into the open. For each one of them, why it works, what to listen for, and where interviewers get it wrong. But I also need to tell you something up front that most videos like this won't. The questions themselves are actually only half of it. There's a pattern behind all 7 of these questions that decides whether any of them work. And I've actually watched it make or break hundreds of interviews and dozens of hires. That, though, is at the end, and it's the part I'd rather you hear from me than find out the expensive and hard way for yourselves. And also, stick around for question 5. It's the one almost nobody asks in interviews, and it's the one I'd keep if I could keep only one of these 7 questions. All right, so let's get into it. Tell me about a project in your career that you are most proud of. This is your opener question, and it's not small talk. It's actually a very deliberate tool. You see, it does 3 jobs at once. It creates, first of all, psychological safety, because everyone can talk about something that they're proud of. It also gives the candidate a moment to settle themselves in. And here's the part most people actually miss. It very often surfaces the best example of the entire interview, the one that you can anchor everything else to. Because you see, once the candidate gives you something interesting, you can bridge straight into, that's really interesting. Now, all projects have pressures and complexities. Did you experience any of that here? You're already in your first real question. No gear change, the candidate never felt the interview even start. And that's precisely what we're after. Where I see this going wrong, however, is this. Managers ask it at the end. I watch it in my clinics constantly. Asked at the end, though, after everything's been assessed, it's disconnected from any real purpose. It's a bonus round question. Same question, wrong position, and you get 0 value out of it. So ask it first. Make it your opener. What kind of work brings out your best? First, we need to demolish, we need to kill the tell me about yourself question. It signals you didn't read the CV, and it ultimately hands over control of the interview to the candidate. In my clinics, it's actually the first thing I correct, and I correct it in almost every first session. You get a 10-minute career tour, and you spend the rest of the interview trying to get back control of the conversation. So ask this instead, because it tests something almost no interview question touches upon: environment fit. You see, a great candidate in the wrong environment is not a great hire. Someone who thrives on autonomy suffocates in a process-heavy team. Someone who needs structure drowns in a startup. What you need to listen for here is this. It's the difference between a weak answer and a strong answer. So a weak answer would look like this. Honestly, I just love a good challenge. I can adapt to pretty much anything. Now, that there tells you nothing. It sounds great, of course, but it contains 0 value, 0 information. A strong answer, however, I do my best work when I own a problem end to end. I do, however, struggle when I'm handed a spec with no context. My best project in the last 2 years started with a vague brief that I actually personally got to shape. You see, that's a person who knows their own operating conditions, their operating system. Now ask yourself this, the only question that matters really. Does what brings out their best actually exist on your team? If it doesn't, that's not a maybe. That's actually the answer you're looking for. Next up, let's talk about the outcome question. any outcome that you're hiring for, really. Here's the formula that you need to follow. You see, this segment here isn't really about a single question. It's about the single most useful principle that I teach. Every outcome that you're hiring for, be it short-term, mid-term, long-term, is in itself a question that you should be asking. You never need to actually invent clever interview questions. Take the outcome that this role must deliver, read it straight off your hiring blueprint, and turn it into a behavioral question. The role needs someone who ships under deadline pressure? Great! Then the question is, have you ever worked on a project with a real tight deadline? Tell me about it. You see, it almost looks embarrassingly simple. And that's kind of the point. But there's two rules that make this work. Keep it to one constraint. In a recent clinic, manager built a question combining burnout, multiple parallel projects, and stakeholder conflict into one sentence. It sounded thorough, but in reality, the more conditions you actually pack in, the less chance the candidate has a real example that matches all of them. So they freeze up or they improvise. One constraint. Let them find the story and then go from there. And qualify what you want before you ask this question. If you want a story with a real problem in it, say so. I'm interested in a situation where things got difficult. Skip that qualifier and I guarantee you that you're going to get a polished success story every time. And that doesn't actually give you the evidence you are looking for. One more thing while we're here. Volume. One good example beats 3 average ones. 4 to 5 questions in an hour, well, that's pretty much your ceiling. But that ceiling matters exactly because of the pattern I mentioned at the start. And we're getting closer to it. But before then, let's look at one more question. What did you personally take ownership of? This one's a bit of a different question. It's not a standalone question. It's, however, the question that lives inside every other question on this list. And it might be the most important 90 seconds of this entire video. But to better explain what I mean, let me tell you about a session I still use as an example for this. A manager in one of my clinics ran a full interview. The candidate answered every question with we. We built the platform, we turned it around, we hit the numbers, we delivered on the KPIs. And the manager bought it. They nodded along, took notes, and ultimately scored it well. Afterwards, however, the person playing the candidate admitted that in the real project, the story was based on, well, he'd essentially just been in the room. Every we was covering for that. And it worked. It got past an experienced manager completely. You see, you're not hiring we, you're hiring one person. We is where individual contribution goes to hide. And most of the time, the candidate isn't even realizing that they're doing it. They're not doing it deliberately. So when you hear we, dig. What did you personally take ownership of? Which part did you take responsibility for yourself? What you need to listen for here is this: whether the story survives contact with questioning. You see, strong candidates are going to get more specific under the pressure of questions. The detail will increase. Weak examples will do the opposite. The language will drift back to team speak, and the specifics will evaporate. One warning here though, never offer options. Was it more 50-50 or were you leading it? They'll pick whatever sounds best. You just wrote their answer for them. Open the question and then silence. Let them fill the space. Tell me about a time a project didn't go the way you planned. Here it is. This is the one I said to wait for. The question almost nobody asks properly, and the one I'd keep if I could only keep one of these. You see, every candidate walks into an interview with success stories. They have rehearsed them. What they haven't rehearsed is failure. And failure is where the real signal lives, because how someone behaves when it goes wrong tells you more than anything about how they behave when it all goes right and they win. The rule from my clinics is this: if the example has no failure in it, pivot to one that does. You're allowed to say, that sounds like it worked out really well. Can you give me one where things didn't work out? What you need to listen for here is this. It's 3 things. Real constraints, not vague challenges. Ownership rather than a story where every problem turns out to be someone else's fault. And a result, even a bad one, plus what they did with it. And jump on anomalies. I once watched a candidate describe their own solution unprompted as state of the art. The interviewer actually let it slide. That phrase, however, is worth nothing until you know what it means to the candidate. It was partly the client's fault. The timing was against us. These sentences are doors. Walk through them immediately and follow up with more questions. I tell every clinic the same thing. This is detective work. You're not judging, you're collecting evidence. Not good, not bad, just evidence. That is. That was the question I'd keep if I could only keep one. But notice what made it work just now. It wasn't the actual question, it was the pivot, the anomaly, the walking through doors. That's the pattern I promised you at the start. And the last two questions are where you'll see it in its purest form, because both of them are designed to be challenged. Tell me about an unpopular decision you made that benefited the team. This is a so-called bar raiser question, the kind popularized by Amazon, but actually often misunderstood by companies that try and copy it. And used properly, it's the most efficient question on this list. It tests two things simultaneously. Social intelligence, so basically, can they make a hard call and manage the human fallout? And positive influence. Was the team actually better off as a result of their actions, as a result of their decisions? That's the design principle. Take two values you care about, find a shared behavior underneath them, and build one question that covers both. Double the evidence, same amount of interview time. What you need to listen for here is friction. You see, a genuinely unpopular decision has resistance in it. People will push back. Someone was annoyed. And if the story is smooth, it wasn't actually an unpopular decision, and you need to actually call it out. That sounds like it went down pretty easily. Give me one where people genuinely disagreed with you. And also, make sure that you validate the example before you commit to it. You see, if the stakes weren't real, ask for a better example. Most managers I coach are surprised they're allowed to do that. But yeah, you are. It's your interview and it's your responsibility to lead the conversation where you need it to go. And finally, what's something you've learned recently and why? The last question, it breaks down the pattern on purpose. It doesn't have to be about work at all, to be honest. You see, what you're assessing for is curiosity as a trait. And the domain is, frankly, irrelevant. Fermentation, bouldering, a language, a framework, whatever. Same behavior, and behaviors transfer across contexts. And then the extension to this question is where it gets really good, really interesting. If I gave you 5 minutes, could you teach it to me? Now, you're testing for communication and knowledge transfer live in the interview. Can they take something they understand and make it land for someone who doesn't know anything about it? Now, I actually use this on junior candidates especially, because with juniors, well, you can't really hire for knowledge or vast amounts of skills. You're hiring mindset, and this question puts mindset on the table in 5 minutes or less. What you're listening for here is honestly the why. Genuinely curious people have a thread that they pulled. People, on the other hand, who are performing curiosity will give you a title and little substance behind it. The questions are very rarely, if ever, the problem. After years of interview clinics and sitting in on interviews every single week and interviewing 12,000 candidates myself, I can tell you that most interviews fail because there is no follow-up to the first question. The candidate gives a confident answer, a fluent answer, and then the manager relaxes and moves on and collects absolutely nothing tangible. No facts, no figures, no metrics, just a gut feeling. But you see, confidence is not the same thing as confidence. So ask one of these 7 questions and then stay there. Mind the answer. You almost never need more questions. You need more from the answers that you already have. That's also why 4 to 5 questions per hour of interviewing is your ceiling. And that's not a limit on questions. It's actually a minimum on depth. I've put all 7 of these questions on a single page with the follow-ups and exactly what to listen for in the interview so that you can actually have it open in your next interview. It's free and the link is in the description below. Now pick 2 or 3 of these questions, not all 7. If this was useful, please also consider subscribing. Everything on this channel comes straight out of real interviews and real interview coaching sessions. So no theory, no HR jargon, just what works in the room. And if you want to know more about how to hire the right people, check out the video linked here.